So we've come to the showdown. First 7 chapters, reconciliation with those that still like Paul, that have reconciled to him, covering, just trying to tie up some loose ends. Chapter 8 and 9, looking at the taking up the offering again, getting all that started again, talking to people who are still on Paul's side. So 9 chapters are done, and obviously, hopefully, the church has come back on side. But there is still a very, very, very big elephant in the room. Probably a couple of them, in fact. And they are the false apostles. Because at some point, whoever was against Paul have gone and brought in their own apostles. They've brought in some replacements. Now, imagine if you're a pastor and you go away on a holiday, take some more service leave, and you come back and there's like a new pastor. And you're, oh, yeah, no, we replaced you. Yeah, you're terrible. So we brought some new guys in, and they're just awesome. In fact, they actually call themselves super apostles. Hupea apostle. I don't know what that meant, whether they had their underwear outside their togas or wore capes, who knows. But they weren't just apostles, they were hyper apostles. They were super apostles. Paul says, oh really? Well, actually, they're false apostles. But let me show you why. So, they're in the room. There's probably a couple of Corinthians, clearly the ones that have brought them in, who are there with them, listening along. Paul, yep, okay, right, typical Paul, trying to abuse us, rah, rah, rah. Now Paul turns his attention towards these guys. But see what I'm doing here? I'm pointing there, but I'm looking at you, because that's what Paul's doing. He never, ever addresses them. He talks about them, he talks around them, but he never talks to them, because that's the way that you really offend somebody. You don't even give them the dignity of your focus. So all of these chapters that have come is Paul comparing himself, or they've compared themselves to Paul, now Paul's comparing himself back to them to show why he is a true apostle, which he's kind of shown anyway, but now he really needs to drive home the point. But more importantly, why they actually are it's not that they're not apostles, it's not that they're not super apostles, it's not that they're average apostles, they are not apostles. And this is the point that Paul needs to make of this. Let's pick it up from chapter 10, verse 1. Paul says, I, Paul, myself. All right, so somebody's reading this letter out, and it would be very easy for to start to lose sight of the fact that it's Paul behind this letter. And so by doing this, whoever it is reading it out is reading those words out. Probably Titus is reading those words out, but it's that reminder, oh, that's right, it's Paul saying this. This is Titus reading on behalf of Paul, but really it's Paul the one that's saying it. So I, Paul, myself, entreat you, by the meekness and gentleness of Christ, I who am humble when face to face with you, but bold towards you when away, I beg of you that when I am present, I may not have to show bold. boldness with such confidence as I count on showing against some who suspect us of walking according to the flesh. I, Paul, who am humble when face to face, and that's a disparaging term. I'm meek, I'm useless, I'm just a wet blanket, I'm hopeless when I'm face to face, but I'm big and tough when I'm away from you. Now that's the sort of the double standard that they're accusing Paul of being. Paul says, look, I wasn't asking that letter. You don't want to see that face to face. You think because you haven't seen it so far it doesn't exist. Trust me, it exists. You just don't want to see it. I'm kind of sparing you of that, and I'd like to spare you of that if I can. Because remember, he's not talking to the apostles here. He's talking to the people who are following them. He's trying to win them back from loyalty to those false apostles. For though we walk in the flesh, we're not waging war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ, being ready to punish every disobedience when your obedience is complete. Now, I won't spend a lot of time on this verse, but it's one you're familiar with probably from some sort of spiritual warfare. We use this to talk about praying against principalities and powers and strongholds and all these sort of things. It's not really what Paul's talking about. There's no context for it here. What Paul is talking about, what he's talking about tearing down, are the arguments that are set up, the false doctrines that are set up that actually bind the Christians away from God. Because at the end of the day, bad theology isn't just, there could be better theology, at least it's theology. No. Bad theology actually can hold you away from God. It can keep you separated from God. These guys represent bad theology. It's not just a matter of coming in and correcting or tweaking their ideas. It's about tearing down their arguments. It's tearing down their wrong ideas. And that's what he has to do. It's not even a case of coming in and saying, we could work with them. No. We need to tear this whole thing down. All their teachings, all of your beliefs about them that somehow being more eloquent makes you a better apostle. These ideas have bound you and have not just kept you away from me, Paul, they've actually kept you away from Christ. And that's the bigger concern. And so our job as apostles is to tear those things apart, to free you so that you can come into full access of Jesus Christ. And that's the task that we set for ourselves, and that's exactly what we're about to do. So join me in the next video and we'll see how Paul does it. So the first piece of evidence that Paul is an apostle, because that's the issue these super apostles have raised, is whether or not Paul is even an apostle. So Paul says, you want proof that I'm an apostle? Well, I've already given it to you in chapter 3, but let's just reiterate the point. Look at what's right in front of your eyes. If anyone is confident that he is Christ's, let him remind himself that just as he is Christ, so also are we. So it's a simple question. How did you come to be a Christian? You preach, Paul. Right. And when you committed your life to Christ, under whose ministry was that? You, Paul. Right. And so you consider yourself a Christian? Yeah. So then if you're a Christian under my ministry, would that not suggest that I'm a minister of Christ? Yeah, we see where you're going with this, Paul. I'm glad you do. Because it's kind of obvious, proof's in the pudding. If I'm not an apostle, you're not a Christian. That's a problem. So if you're a Christian, you're welcome. Not that I need the praise for it, but it at the very least endorses my ministry. For even though I do boast a little too much of our authority, which of course he doesn't, but that's what they've assumed, which the Lord gave for building you up and not for destroying you, I will not be ashamed. It's kind of like this. Imagine your little kid wants to drink poison. And you go, no, Don't be silly. It's just ridiculous. Oh, you're so terrible. You're a terrible parent. You're just abusing your authority, and oh, you're so bad. And you're okay. Fine, granted. I'm a terrible parent because I won't let you eat poison. I won't let you drink poison. Shame on me. But it's to build you up and not to watch you die in front of me. So yeah, I'm sorry if I did come across a little bit strong. I'm sorry that I cared about you so much that I was just maybe a little bit abrasive in the way that I, disciplined you so that you would not go to hell. Forgive me. I do not want to appear to be frightening you with my letters, for they say, guys in the corner, they say, his letters are weighty and strong, but his bodily presence is weak and his speech of no account. Literally, this speech is of no account is his speech moves us to contempt. It's not just that he's a bad preacher. When he gets up, I just kind of cringe. It's just that bad. It's just, oh my goodness, do I have to suffer through this? Fine, I'll grant you that. And my letters are weighty and strong. Let such a person understand, again, this is nice use of periphrasis, let such a person understand that what we say by letter when absent, we do when present. You haven't seen it yet because I'd rather not have to go there. But if I have to, I will. But let's just see if we can avoid that scenario. Not that this would have ever happened in Corinth, but do you remember when Paul got really fired up in Galatia? There was a first missionary journey. He's there. I can't remember the name of the island, but you've got the governor, Sergius Paulus, and you've got this other guy, Bar Jesus, who's contradicting Paul's message, who's just constantly challenging him. And so he fires up and he says, you are a son of the devil, and really just lets go. The dude went blind. Just think about that for a second. He went blind. So when Paul fires up, people go blind. The demon girl in Philippi, he fired up. Demon left, fled. Paul's like, you don't want to go there. There's kind of like this power that works through me. It's kind of, I can't necessarily control it, but sometimes when I walk past people, my shadow actually raises them up from their sick beds. And, I've touched handkerchiefs in the past, and they've been taken to the sick, and the sick have been healed. I didn't ask for this power of God to work in me, but when I fire up, it's kind of like Hulk. You don't want to see me when I'm angry. Things happen, crazy things happen. So let's just try to keep everything constrained, okay? Cool? All right, so I'll go back to being Bruce Banner. Okay. Not that we dare to classify or compare ourselves with some of those who are commending themselves. Again, our friends in the corner. But when they measure themselves by one another and compare themselves with one another, they're without understanding. You know those letters of recommendation, they probably wrote them for each other. You get that, right? The only good things you've heard about them are what they're saying about each other. It's kind of like three people just, oh, this guy's awesome. No, he's more awesome than I am. No, he's even more awesome. And everyone, oh, they're so awesome. And everyone's like, you're three douchebags. Like, there's nothing good about any of you. In your opinion, you're awesome, but you all kind of suck. Paul's like, that just proves it. If all they're doing is endorsing each other, they're without understanding. They're just a bunch of idiots. But we will not boast beyond limits, but will boast only with regard to the area of influence God assigned to us, to reach even to you. For we are not overextending ourselves, as though we did not reach you, for we were the first to come all the way to you with the gospel of Christ. Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. A lot of you ministers will know what I mean when I say this. You've been working with in a ministry for years and years and years, and maybe in a church or in a youth group for years and years, and you've been saying the same thing week in, week out, ad nauseum. It's just, you're thinking, my goodness, this is driving me crazy. And then you get a guest preacher comes in, and they preach exactly the same thing, and all of a sudden, everybody responds. And it's like, oh my goodness, why hasn't anybody ever preached this before? My goodness, pastor, what have you've been holding back from? I've been saying the same thing for years, and only now you listen. It's kind of like that. But then imagine then if that pastor, whoever that preacher was, went around from then on saying, you should have seen the results that I had in that particular church. Oh my goodness, I am so awesome. I was like, I planted, I did all the basic work, I laid the foundation, I was the one sending letters, I was the one building you up, and then these guys come along and they preach one sermon and suddenly they're like, Jesus has come back. All right, look, if that's what they're going to boast about, that's fine, but I'm just going to say, I'll never do that. I'm not going to come into somebody else's ministry, do one thing, and take all the credit for it. I'd rather go and do something new. I'd rather go and do the groundwork and spend the years and put the time in and pay the dues. That's kind of how I'm going to approach my ministry. You guys are fine if you want to take credit for my work. You're welcome, but I'll never do that because that's kind of what stupid people do. We do not boast beyond limit in the labours of others, but our hope, I love that, just let us sit for a minute. We will not boast beyond limit in the labours of others. That's all they're doing. But our hope is that as your faith increases, our area of influence amongst you may be greatly enlarged, so that we may preach the gospel in lands beyond you, without boasting of work already done in another's area of influence. Let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord. Remember, we said that all the way back in 1 Corinthians. This is a good catch verse for Paul. For it is not the one who commends himself who is approved, but the one whom the Lord commends. Ouch. These guys are just talking themselves up. They're just commending themselves. Paul says, that's all good and well, but so the question might be asked, why did these guys get a hearing in the first place? These false apostles, if they're so bad as Paul's describing them, how did they get a foot in the door in the first place? Well, the answer's pretty simple. They had a lot of boasting about each other and about all these great achievements that they've seen in their ministry. It really is kind of like, if every time a miracle happened in ministry or, a great altar call, you literally put it down on your CV in bullet points of all of these great things that I've done. It's not wrong. If you're doing that, it's not wrong. It doesn't really say much, But for these false apostles, that was it. That was their CV, was who they were. And so they could list off all of these great things that they've done. And then they asked the question of the Corinthians, so what did Paul do? What was so great about Paul? Oh, he did a few things while he was here, but, surely there's more to it than that. Well, we don't really know. He didn't really say much about his ministry. He didn't really boast much. But clearly, these false apostles have something impressive going for them. It's obviously enough to get the Corinthians interested. And so in response, they're saying, effectively what they've said to Paul is, look, we've got super apostles, right? I mean, okay, you've started to undermine them, sure, but they're super apostles. Right? These guys wear capes. I mean, these guys are pretty awesome. What's so good about you, Paul? You never really boasted much. You never really bragged. Now we go, oh, well, it's because, that's what humble people should do. Well, this is a world where boasting is expected. If you're a great person, it's expected that you boast. That's just how you gain status. Paul never did that. And so they're kind of like, well, what is it that's so great about you? If you really are an apostle, then you must have some pretty good stories to tell. You must have some great miracles to tell. So let's hear it, Paul. I mean, basically what they're saying is we want to compare CVs. We've got super apostles. You must be a super duper apostle if you're going to be better than these guys. So what's your CV? Now, Paul knows this. Paul knows that this is what they want. They want him to boast. They want him to sing his own praises and tell them how fantastic he is. He doesn't want a bar of it, but he's realizing, he does realize that he's going to have to do something. He's going to have to respond somehow to this request to see how fantastic he is. But he doesn't want to do it. It's just that thing you just don't want to even get out of bed to do. Paul's kind of that. So he's trying to just procrastinate as much as possible. This is in verse 11, chapter 11, verse 1. I wish you would bear with me in a little foolishness, talking about this boasting. Do bear with me, For I feel a divine jealousy for you, since I betrothed you to one husband, to present you as a pure virgin to Christ. But I am afraid that, as the serpent deceived Eve by his cunning, your thoughts will be led astray from sincere and pure devotion to Christ. Who's the serpent here? Well, obviously it's these guys. For if someone comes and proclaims another Jesus than the one you proclaimed, than one we proclaimed, or if you receive a different spirit from the one you received, or if you accept a different gospel from the one you accepted, you put up with it readily enough. Paul's saying, look, I hope you're going to put up with me in a little bit of foolishness, but apparently that's the only way you hear things, because you kind of fools yourself. You don't really know the gospel. That's why you put up with any gospel that you hear. So I guess I'm going to have to be a fool in order to get my point across, or for you to even be able to hear me. It kind of takes one to know one, in a way. Indeed, I consider that I am not in the least inferior to these, quote, super apostles, even if I am unskilled in speaking. I am not so in knowledge. Indeed, in every way we have made this plain to you in all things. Paul says, I consider that I'm not in the least inferior to these apostles. No, you're going to make a point of that a bit later on. Actually, it says here, even if I'm unskilled in speaking, the word he uses here is the word idiotes, where we get our word idiot from. And it literally means uneducated. Paul says, when it comes to speaking, yeah, I'll admit it, I'm an idiot. Fine, you got me there. But you have to at least acknowledge that I have some knowledge. I've shown you that. I've proven that. So, you know, knowledge and speech, they're the two main things that you have to be elite. I've at least got it going with the knowledge side. I'll grant you on the speech, though, well, not really, but just we'll make that point. Sure, in that way, I'm inferior to these super apostles. But what's the real crux of the issue? It's right here in verse 7. Or did I commit a sin in humbling myself so that you might be exalted? Because I preached God's gospel to you free of charge. Because really that's the issue. I didn't take your money. And you've actually taken that to be a sin. Or that somehow because I've offended you, it's in some way a sin. Is that what you mean by it? Was it a sin that I didn't want to take your money? Is that what we've got to? I mean, really, you've gone to these guys because of my sin, I've not taken your money. Come on. He goes on, I robbed other churches by accepting support from them. I like that. I robbed them, you know, that's basically what it came down to. I robbed them in order to serve you. And when I was with you in need, I did not burden anyone. For the brothers who came from Macedonia supplied my needs. So remember, this is where Timothy and Silas came from Macedonia. They supplied Paul's need. Right? That's where this whole thing went wrong. And that's why right at the end of 2 Corinthians, we're still talking about something that happened 5 years ago. Because that was the starting point of the downfall of that relationship. So I refrained, and I will refrain from burdening you in any way. It's not even about my right to demand from you. I will not be a burden to you. As the truth of Christ is in me, this boasting of mine will not be silenced in the regions of Achaia. And why? Because I do not love you? God knows I do. I mean, that's what we've got to. You didn't take our money, so you mustn't like us very much. You must like the Macedonians more than us. You really think that's what this is? It's because I loved you that I didn't take your money. It's because I loved you that I didn't abuse you and steal from you. I stole from other people so they wouldn't have to steal from you. But apparently that's a sin. And for that, I'm so terribly sorry. And what I'm doing, I will continue to do in order to undermine the claim of those who would like to claim, again, there's the guys in the corner, would like to claim that in their boasted mission, they work on the same terms as we do. Oh, that's harsh. That's harsh. These people over there think they're like us. They got nothing on us. For such men, for such men are false apostles. Right? They're not super apostles. They're not even apostles. They're false apostles. Deceitful workmen, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So it is no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. Their end will correspond to their deeds. Wow. Now, Paul said a moment ago, I'm not the least inferior to these super apostles. Thank God, because they're servants of Satan, right? I mean, he'd have to be pretty bad to be less than a servant of Satan. And they're in the room. They're in the room. Wow. Wow. Okay, he's not holding back here. This is just, someone's about to go blind, kind of, Paul. It's heating up. So, well, there's plenty more to come, so join me in the next video. So Paul realizes that the only way he's going to win back this small group who are following these false apostles is to give them what they want. It's to just give him his CV, to tell them all these great reasons why he's so fantastic and why he's better than these super apostles. If that's what they need, then that's what he's just going to have to do. But he wants to be very careful for them to realize that this is just about as stupid and as dumb and as ungodly as you could possibly imagine. And so he spends even more time procrastinating before he gets to the point as to how stupid this actually is. He says, I repeat, let no one think me foolish, but even if you do, accept me as a fool, so that I too may do a little boasting. What I am saying with this boastful confidence, I say not as the Lord would, but as a fool. Think about that for a moment. What I'm about to do is not the word of the Lord. This is the word of a fool. Right, so right now, guys, just so you realize, before we get into this, Holy Spirit just left the room. He's not with us anymore. This is just us now. God wants no part of this. This is not the word of the Lord. This is me being an idiot. But apparently, it takes one to know one. Since many boast according to the flesh, I too will boast, for you gladly bear with fools, being so wise yourself. So, all right. You need me to be a fool? Apparently, that's the only way I can speak to a fool. Okay, let's get it. I just can't do it. He goes on, for you bear it if someone makes slaves of you, or devours you, or takes advantage of you, or puts on airs, or strikes you in the face. To my shame, I must say, we were too weak for that. One of the things about this patron-client relationship that I've alluded to is that you would have your patron who would be supporting the client, and there's the client's responsibility to come and give honor to the patron. Now, in a world before social services, you can very easily see how this practice might get abused. You could be a person that says, well, why do I need to bother working when I can just go and find myself a patron? What do they need from me? I'll go there every morning, I'll stand on their doorstep, I'll give them a high five, tell them how fantastic they are, maybe follow them around through the day. I've got nothing else to do anyway, I'm not working. If that's what they want from me, that's fine. If it means I don't have to go out and dig a hole or, plow a field, then perfect. Sign me up. So what used to happen was that in these patron-client relationships, you get people that would abuse them. They were called parasites. And that's how they were known. In other words, you're talking about kind of the first century doll bludger. And so the way that they're described is exactly the terms that Paul uses here. They devour you, they take advantage of you, they put on airs, that is, they strike a pose there. Oh, you're so fantastic. Oh my goodness, you are just like God himself. You are so, oh wow. Just talking the whole thing up, putting on airs. But really what they're doing is just striking you in the face. They're just abusing you. Put it back in the context of Corinthians, because what's happened is that these false apostles have come into Corinth, and where Paul hasn't taken support, they have. Now, for Paul to take support is legitimate. He is a legitimate apostle. But if a false apostle comes along to a Christian congregation to take money from them, to take financial support from them, what that person is a parasite. they're an abuser. And even if that's not so obvious, it's going to be obvious now, the way that Paul is describing them. So what he says about these people, this is talking about them. He says, you will so easily put up with someone who makes a slave of you. They've enslaved you to their desires. They're devouring from you. They're going into your pantry and they're raiding it for their own pleasure. They're taking advantage of you. They're talking a big game, but really, they're just striking you in the face. Paul says, to my shame, I'm so sorry, we were too weak for that. Because clearly a sign of a really strong minister is somebody that can abuse their people. That's real strength. That's real bravado. Paul says, obviously we must be weak because we didn't come in there and abuse you. I'm so sorry. I'm so unbelievably sorry. But whatever anyone else dares to boast of, I'm speaking as a fool. Let's be clear about this. I'm speaking as a fool. I also dare to boast. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they offspring of Abraham? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? Are they Christians? I'm a better one. Okay. What's the deal with being Hebrew, being Jewish? Well, of course, you are of Abraham, right? I mean, and it wasn't just about being able to say, oh, I'm Jewish, but you need to be able to trace your descendancy back to Abraham because he's the father of the Jewish nation. And so you are full-blooded Jew if you are from the son of a child of Abraham. But the only tribes, so there was the 12 tribes of Israel, they all went into exile. Only 2 of them came back, and that was the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. Saul was of the tribe of Benjamin, or Paul. Saul, the king named after the king who was a Benjamite, Saul. Paul could say, I'm a Benjamite, which means that he can literally trace his bloodline back to Abraham. So Paul says, if we're talking about Jewishness, look, I've got the circumcision to prove it, but more than that, I've got the bloodline to prove it. I'm as Jewish as they come. But that's not important. What's important is, are they Christians? Are they servants of Christ? Paul says, I'm a better one. And you go, wow, that's arrogant. Really, Paul? You're going to claim that you're a better Christian than these other guys? Yeah. But to be fair, they're servants of Satan. I mean, you could try, I don't think it's going to work, to be a servant of Satan and a servant of Christ. I just don't see how that would work. So if you're going to serve Satan, you can't at the same time serve Christ. So if these guys are actually serving Satan, that would say at the same time, they're not Christians. So to Paul to say, I'm a better servant of Christ than they are, well, that's pretty easy because they don't even serve Christ at all. They're not even Christian, right? So if I was to say, I'm a better Christian than my atheist neighbor, that's not me boasting, that's just stating a fact, because I'm a Christian at all. I may not be a very good Christian, but I'm still a better one than one that's not even a Christian to begin with. But for the Corinthians, this is gold. This is like, oh, finally, Paul's about to give us what we want to hear. I mean, he's about to come out and say he's a better Christian. Now we go, oh my goodness, you're so arrogant. The Corinthians are going, yes, finally. What makes you so good, Paul? You're a better Christian than these guys? Okay, fine, we'll grant you that. Tell us why, Paul. What are your reasons? So we'll come back in the next video and we'll see why. They're on the edge of their seats. They're finally, the big moment's arrived when Paul's going to explain all of these great things that he's done, all of these fantastic ministries that he's been part of, and the miracles and all the rest of it. Finally, Paul is going to list for them what makes him a super duper apostle as compared to these just plain old super apostles. And he says, all right, here it goes. Before we get there, just let's be clear, I'm talking like a madman. Not even a fool anymore. This is insane. This is completely insane. With far greater labors, far more imprisonments, what? With countless beatings and often near death. Where are you going with this, Paul? 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. Now, you might have heard it preached before, maybe you've preached it yourself, that why you only got 39 lashes, 40 minus 1, is because if you flog a person more than 40 times, they're going to die. Maybe you've heard that before. Every time I've preached this, I've asked the question of the audience, and always at least somebody says, oh, yeah, we've heard that before. My 6-year-old would be able to figure out that it's kind of a dumb thing to say. I've got friends that are big people, like big muscly guys. If I flogged that guy 40 times, he'd just take it as a good back massage. If you flogged me 40 times, I'd be dead 3 times over. Basic physiology would suggest that the number of times you flog somebody is completely irrelevant. There's no set number. It's because it's kind of suddenly like your body's going, oh, wait, we're at 39, one more I'm going to die, and then 40, boom, you're dead. Come on. It's a bit silly. Why you only get 40 minus 1 comes back to Deuteronomy 25:2. What this punishment is talking about, this is the synagogue punishment. So in the synagogue, they have the authority, the right to minister their own punishment, to deal with people within their community. So we've talked a lot about this. In your community, it's about maintaining community discipline. And so the Jews did have the right within their community to discipline people who were what's the word I'm looking for? Just blasphemers, teaching false doctrine, that sort of thing. Reprobate, no, the word will come to me. When somebody is found to be guilty of the crime of blasphemy, they have a choice. They can be flogged or they can be exiled, excommunicated from the community, from the synagogue, never welcome back into the synagogue. Now, the synagogue is the heartbeat. That is the location where the Jews in that community would meet. So to be excommunicated from the synagogue is a big deal. So the alternative then is to be flogged. Deuteronomy 25 says that if the guilty man deserves to be beaten, the judge shall cause him to lie down and be beaten in his presence with a number of stripes in proportion to his offence. 40 stripes may be given to him, but not more, lest if one should go on to beat him with more stripes than these, your brother be degraded in your sight. It's got absolutely nothing to do with if it's going to kill a person. It's entirely to do with whether it's going to shame a person. There's discipline, and then there's just shame in the person. And so what the Jews would do in the synagogue is they would determine the level of the crime, the level of the offence, which would then first determine the type of punishment. And if it's been deemed that the person deserves to be flogged, it's then up to the person who's actually doing the flogging to determine the number of stripes based on actually the physical size of the person. So if you're a small person, you would expect to get less lashes because they recognise that you're a smaller body and you may not survive that many lashes. Now, this is different to the Romans. Most of the time when the Romans flogged a person, they would die because of the types of whips they used, and they were terrible. But for the Jews, they still had a very strong respect for the dignity of the people within their community. They wanted to discipline you, but they didn't want to humiliate you or to potentially kill you. That was the last thing they wanted to do. And so they would then determine, based on your size, how serious the flogging would be. So the fact that on 5 different occasions, Paul was given the 40 lashes minus 1, which is the maximum punishment, would actually suggest to us that he was quite a large guy. Be it muscly or maybe a bit overweight, I don't know. But he was obviously, they deemed him big enough to be able to receive the full 40 lashes, or 40 minus 1. But there's something more profound at work here. Paul says on 5 different occasions, he was given the option. Having preached Jesus, he would be then given he'd been charged, given the option of take the flogging or be excommunicated. On 5 different occasions, he took the flogging. Conversely, had he taken the excommunication, he wouldn't be welcomed back at the synagogue the next Saturday. So how could he come back and preach Jesus if he's excommunicated? So it would be better for the mission to take the flogging than it would be to take the excommunication. Now, once you've been flogged, it might take a couple of weeks before you can come back after that sort of flogging. Because the whip they used to use, they'd get a long leather lash and they'd double it over so you'd have sort of 2 big cords, and that's what they used to flog you with. And so it would have been quite damaging. But here's my question. We've realised that Paul's a human. He wasn't some angelic being.